Have you ever had your priest ask you for confession advice? Father Antonio had been our parish priest for 15 years. Every Sunday, I'd see him at the altar, perfect posture, voice booming about sin and redemption. He baptized my kids, married my daughter, buried my mother. The man was basically a saint in our small Connecticut town. That's why I nearly choked on my coffee when he showed up at my house at midnight, looking like he'd aged 10 years in one day. "I need your help," he said, and I could smell whiskey on his breath. I let him in because what else do you do when your priest shows up looking destroyed? He sat at my kitchen table, head in his hands. "I've done something terrible, and I don't know who else to talk to. Now, I'm just a high school history teacher. I'm not qualified for this." But Father Antonio looked at me with these desperate eyes and said, "You're the only person in this town who never judges anyone. I've watched you for years." Then he told me everything. Turns out, Father Antonio had been stealing from the church collection for 3 years. Not for drugs or gambling or women, but for his brother Paolo, who lived in Italy. Paolo had gotten mixed up with some dangerous people, owed them money, and they were threatening his family. Antonio had sent over $200,000 to keep them safe. "I told myself God would understand," he whispered. "But now the diocese is doing an audit next week. They'll find everything." I sat there stunned. This man who'd preached honesty every Sunday had been living a complete lie. But the worst part? He wasn't even asking for absolution. He wanted advice on how to cover it up. "Could you help me with the books? You teach math sometimes, right?" he asked. I almost laughed at the absurdity. "Father, I teach history, not accounting fraud." He started crying then, real ugly tears. "They'll excommunicate me. My mother is 85. This will kill her." That's when I noticed the envelope on the table. He'd brought $50,000 in cash, his entire life savings, trying to replace what he could before the audit. "What if we make it look like a donation?" he suggested desperately. "From an anonymous benefactor?" I pushed the money back. "You need to come clean, Father. Tell the bishop everything." He looked at me like I'd slapped him. "Easy for you to say. You haven't spent your whole life serving God only to fail when it mattered most." The next morning I went to early mass expecting to see a substitute priest. But there was Antonio, conducting service like nothing happened. His sermon? The importance of confession and seeking forgiveness. The hypocrisy made me sick. After mass, I stayed behind. "Did you tell them?" I asked. He shook his head. "I found another way. Borrowed from a private lender to cover the shortfall." My blood went cold. "You borrowed from a loan shark to pay back stolen church money?" He wouldn't meet my eyes. "It's handled." 3 days later, the audit happened. Everything checked out perfectly. Father Antonio even got praised for his excellent bookkeeping. I thought maybe he'd gotten away with it. Then men started showing up at the church. Tough-looking guys who definitely weren't there for salvation. Antonio started looking haggard, scared. The collection plates got lighter because he was skimming again, this time to pay his new creditors. One Sunday, during his sermon about truth and righteousness, I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up in the middle of church and said, "Father, maybe you should tell everyone about your brother Paolo." The church went dead silent. Antonio's face went white. "What about truth and confession, Father? Doesn't that apply to you?" I asked. People started murmuring, confused. Antonio tried to continue the sermon, but his voice cracked. After mass, the bishop showed up. Turns out, several parishioners had called about my outburst. Antonio confessed everything that night. The full truth came out, and it was worse than I knew. Paolo never existed. There was no brother in Italy, no dangerous people. Antonio had been sending money to a woman in Florida, someone he met online who claimed to love him. He'd been catfished for 3 years, sending money to someone who probably wasn't even real. The church quietly transferred him to a monastery in New Mexico for spiritual reflection. No criminal charges, just swept under the rug. But the private lender he borrowed from, they didn't care about church politics. Last I heard, Antonio was working 3 jobs trying to pay them back. The woman in Florida, never found. The account was fake, the photos stolen, the love letters probably written by some scammer in a warehouse somewhere. Sometimes I wonder if I should have helped him cook the books. At least then he'd only be guilty of theft, not complete and utter stupidity. But mostly I think about his last sermon, the one about truth. He looked right at me when he said, "The truth doesn't set you free. It destroys everything you've built." He wasn't wrong.